Yes.
So, like if you want to create a game program, so we have to start with the stiffness matrix, basic stiffness matrix with everyone. We have to follow some rules to do that.
That depends on what is the, I mean, what is the question and how much time is allotted. Obviously, I don't expect you to derive the complete finite interpolation from first principles within half an hour and also solve the beam problem. And beam stiffness is a standard thing. Obviously, everybody knows what is the stiffness matrix of a prismatic beam section, uniform cross section. So you can straight away, I mean, unless I ask you something about the basic formulation of the beam element, it should be fine. I mean, that depends on the question, and I don't really appreciate why are you so concerned about how you should answer the question. I would be more concerned about you picking up the concepts of the subject. And if you pick up the concepts of the subject, you should know, you will know what how to answer the question.
Yes.
Any other question? Okay, किसी और को तो होगा. हाँ, yes, Prathamesh.
Right, when I know that it's doing problems. I have taken someone one more day to bring the ends and I will put with this our approximation further the approximation not plus even x to the base square plus a3x2. So
What are you doing? You will use one node in between and
this right I have taken node between means middle and middle. I have carried out the process with the approximation that we have done for previous that one element of things. That photo approximation.
yes.
Then I come up with 6x4 matrix.
6x4.
Yes, sir.
How come?
Each equation corresponding to n1 into opponents.
See, when I say you need to add one node, I mean, see, what did I mention here? See, these are two elements. There is one node in between, but these are two elements. I mean, you need to use two finite elements of two nodes. So you divide this into two elements. You discretize this entire length of the beam L by using two finite elements. One finite element defined by nodes 1 and 2. Second finite element defined by nodes 2 and 3. So individually both the elements, each of these elements is still a two-node element.
So what you have to find out coefficients.
Pardon?
In order to find out coefficients, coefficient approximation.
So which coefficients are you talking about?
So A0, A1, A2, A3.
Why do you need to compute A0, A1, A2 and A3? I mean, you can compute, but then A0, there will be 4 coefficients for this element and there will be another set of 4 coefficients for this element. And the process is exactly same what we already discussed for two-node element, because each of these is a two-node element. Isn't it? You can look at this. This is element 1 defined by element node 1 and node 2, and element 2 defined by node 2 and node 3. So the displacement model for element 1 would be given by a cubic polynomial, because there are 4 terms, 4 constants here, 4 degrees of freedom, 2 primary variables at node 1, 2 primary variables at node 2. So there would be 4 values to be interpolated. So a cubic polynomial with 4 unknown coefficients can be defined over element 1, and another set of 4 coefficients can be defined for element number 2. Now domain of individual elements is going to be different. Element 1 is defined by x is equal to 0 to L by 2, and here it will be element 2 will be defined by x is equal to L by 2 to x is equal to L. So that is what we said. I mean, this is the stiffness matrix for element 1, K1, which will be governed by degrees of freedom of node 1 and node 2, that is V1 theta 1 and V2 theta 2, and element 2 will have another stiffness matrix K2, which will be governed by degrees of freedom of node 2 and node 3. When you assemble, there will be this common overlapping area with common degrees of freedom associated with common degrees of freedom at node 2. Right, so individually the element stiffness matrix would still be, for individual element, it would still be equal to 12EI by L cube, 6EI by L square, minus 12EI by L cube, and minus 6EI by L square. Minus 6EI or what? Let me see. Okay. 6EI. So that would be 6EI. So this would be 6EI. Right? And similarly, for theta 1, it would be 4EI by L cube, 6EI by L square, by L square, 4EI by L, and then minus 6EI by L square, 2EI. And similarly the other two terms corresponding to jth degree of freedom. Right. So that would be minus 12EI by L cube and 6EI by L square, and this one would be, okay,
so minus 6EI by L square.
so 3, 2, so minus 6EI by L square, 2EI by L, and then it will be, what will be here, 12EI by L cube, and 6EI by L square, 6EI. Right? So this would be 2EI by L, 4EI by L, so then this would be So now this L here would be L by 2 for each element. So I can write this as element length of the element E. And when I use two elements of equal length to divide the span L into two elements, so the finite element model is element 1, element 2, connectivity is element node I, node J. So element 1, node I is 1, node J is 2, element 2, node I is 2, node J is 3. And this is defined by x1 is equal to 0, x2 is equal to L by 2, x2 is equal to L by 2, and x3 is equal to L. So individually, length of each element is L by 2 and L by 2. So that's what we will substitute here. In place of LE, you will substitute L by 2 and you get the stiffness matrix for individual elements. And then you will just superimpose the stiffness matrix corresponding to these four terms would overlap with these four terms. And you get the 2 by 2 stiffness matrix. So you will get 12 EI upon, let's say, L1 cube and 6 EI upon L1 square, and then you have 6 EI L1 square and 4 EI upon L1, right? So this is element number 1. So this is the corresponding to V2 and theta 2, and add to this the contributions coming from element number 2, so that would be 12 EI by L2 cube plus 6 EI by L2 square. So that is the 2 by 2 matrix that you have to solve for. V2 theta 2 is equal to, what are the forces? Forces are what will be the forces? Okay. QL by 2 and QL square by 12 minus QL square by 12. So QL1 by 2 minus QL1 square by 12 plus,
Sir,
you will have QL2 by 2 plus QL2 squared by 12. Yes?
sir, we have considered the load of the acting effort, so the forces will be manual.
Yeah, so we consider load to be acting upward, so these are the reactions, isn't it? Nodal equivalent. No, so this is equivalent force. Reaction would be opposite, and the nodal equivalent force would be the opposite side of reaction. So you are saying this should be minus QL by 2?
Sir, I think they are the reaction forces. So
No, they are not the reaction forces. It will be negative of the reaction forces. That's how they will be in equilibrium. I mean, this has to be the external force. Reaction is an internal force. Right? This would be minus QL by 2. The reaction, if at all. Right? I mean, you need to calculate, I mean, what is this force? This force is L1 Q dx 0 to LE. Right? And it will evaluate to QL by 2. And this is the nodal equivalent of this force. And numerically that will be equal to negative of the reaction that you have as a fixed beam reactions. Right? So, okay, so the force is going to be like this, so reaction is going to be like this, moment. So nodal force is going to be like this. Fine. So that is the force. So this will of course cancel out. If L1 is equal to L2, then this will cancel out. Otherwise there will be whatever is the net balance. And then you solve for this system of equations, and you can solve for V2 and theta 2, and then eventually you will go back to equation for individual elements and say Vx would be equal to V2 and 3x for element 1 plus theta 2 and 4x, because V1 and V1 V3 is equal to 0, theta 1, theta 3, they are all equal to 0 by these are the essential boundary conditions. So the terms corresponding to V1 and theta 1, they would not contribute. And similarly, the displacements for element number 2 would be given by V2 N1 for element 2 x plus theta 2 N2 for element 2 x. Right? So this in all, so this will be for x between 0 to L by 2, and this is for x in the range L by 2 to L. And this will complete the displacement solution for complete beam. Once you assemble the equations and then impose the boundary conditions, you will end up with this system of equations. Any questions? this will be so this one would be N1, but this one would be equal to N3 Q dx 0 to L. Any questions? Prathamesh?
No, sir.
Okay, so did I make things worse for you or did this help?
No, sir, I help it.
Okay, fine. Any other question? Okay. So we have discussed this transverse deformation of beam. Now, as a first order analysis, first order approximation, remember we are always working within the framework of small deformations. So under small deformations, axial deformations and the transverse deformations, they are considered to be decoupled. Right? So whatever happens in axial deformation, that does not have any influence whatsoever on the transverse deformation. That is obviously incorrect, because if you have any transverse deformation, then it is obviously the bending theory tells you that it will the member is experiencing direct stresses and direct strains. So that will have an impact on the axial deformations as well. But we consider axial deformations to be decoupled from transverse deformations, and for all practical purposes we can superimpose the truss model with this beam model to get what we call as frame model. Frame element is obtained by beam element plus truss or bar element. So what is the beam element and truss and bar element? So the degrees of freedom now look like it's a, if you recall, truss and bar element, standard truss and bar element is a two-node element, so agrees exactly with the beam element. So now we have axial deformations as well as transverse deformations at node I, node J, so Uj, Vj, theta j, Ui, theta I, Vi. And the element level equations can be obtained by just superposition we can have truss element members AE by L 0 0 minus AE by L 0 0 0 0 minus AE by L. Okay. मेरी क्लास चल रही है, मैं बाद में कॉल करता हूँ. Right, and here you will have the bending stiffness that we will that 4 by 4 matrix that you have for the flexural beam element. And the degrees of freedom would be ui, vi, theta I, uj, vj, theta j. And you have 2D frame element that you can use for analysis, and you will find that is now this member. Obviously we are looking at x-axis oriented along the member axis, y-axis transfers to the member axis, and if this member is oriented along some direction at some inclination, to the global system of equations, global frame of reference x and y, then these equations, element level equations, have to be transformed to x and y coordinate system using the standard transformation process. And once you have that, then after transformation to global system of equations, you can assemble the system of equations and then impose the boundary conditions and solve for unknowns. So that's the basic modeling for analysis of plane frames, and same concept can be used for analysis of grillage elements. Instead of this truss element, what you have is the shaft element that will go, that will take care of the torsion. So instead of AE by L, you will have GJ by J, GJ by L, so torsional rigidity, torsional stiffness, that will model the grillage element, so to say. Right? So this is a standard trick in structural finite elements modeling. We can combine elementary elements and we can superimpose the deformation modes, and we can derive new element types which will be used in practice. Right? So here it may appear as a very, very trivial thing, but this is indeed a very powerful technique which helps in developing very efficient finite elements for the analysis of shell problems. Any questions with this? No questions. Fine. So let's start with something very different from what we have discussed so far. We have been talking about the beam element, Euler-Bernoulli beam element, and we know that Euler-Bernoulli beam element is used to model pure flexure, and the shear strain is 0. Right? So tell me one thing, how do you have shear force when shear strain is 0? Or how do you have shear stress when shear strain is 0? In Euler-Bernoulli beam? You do have shear stresses in beams, or you don't have shear stresses in beams? Beams in bending. Yes, your audio is garbled.
That's very good.
Yes, much better.
Also,
Yeah, much better, much better.
Sir, so with Albert Bernoulli bending theory was for pure bending condition. But if we tend to apply for the not the pure bending condition, then it becomes an assumption that shear stress is zero. But that is not valid. But still, it is like it does not cause much error because stresses due to shear will be much less than normal stresses.
Ketan, my question is, do you have shear stress in either Bernoulli beam or not? I mean, distribution of, oh, we do have, otherwise how do you have shear force then? You have shear force, isn't it? And shear force is the resultant of shear stress over the cross section. It's a stress resultant.
Yes, sir. We will have.
Right? So now, if there is no shear deformation, how do you have shear stresses?
So because due to difference in bending moment.
Difference in bending moment. So, yeah, that is the equilibrium. If you are looking at the equilibrium principle, then of course shear stress is the first derivative of bending moment. Right? But that's a macro level. I am looking at a continuum point of view.
So we have shear deformation in beams, but we neglect that because the amount is very less in case of normal beam. But in case of deep beams, we need to consider that.
Yes, but see, we neglect that. So in Euler-Bernoulli hypothesis, there is no shear deformation at all. We neglect in the ab initio. The shear deformation is zero. In Euler-Bernoulli hypothesis, shear deformation in the beam is zero. And that is my question. If the shear deformation in the shear strain is zero, the entire theory, entire hypothesis is developed on that premise that shear strain is zero. That's how you get the concentric circle of the deformed shape. Right? So if the shear deformation is zero, then how is it that you are having shear stresses? Take wild guesses, and this is not an examination. We are just, you can afford to take chances.
So there is source possible, there are also complementations.
What did you say?
So when you bring conjugators address, there are source spaces, but also there are complementary source.
Yes. So for the equilibrium, I mean, if you, that is fine. So you are moving in the right direction. The idea is you have shear flow in the beam. That is coming because of the equilibrium of the normal stresses that is generated because of the flexure. Right? So if you add the forces at each fiber, longitudinal forces, then you have shear in the cross section. And in order to maintain the equilibrium, that horizontal shear will have to have equivalent vertical counterpart just to maintain the equilibrium of the section. Right? So complementary shears would be there. So transverse shear that you see are the complementary shears of what you obtain by the equilibrium or the resultant of the direct stresses, summation of direct forces caused by the direct stresses in the fibers. And that is why you will find that the shear stress distribution in the beam is maximum at the neutral axis, and it vanishes, it goes to zero at the extreme fibers, because by that time you have, if it's a prismatic uniform section, then the tension would be balanced by the compression and there would not be any residual horizontal force acting on that section, on that fiber lamina. Right, so that's how. So you need to look at the shear flow and just brush up your concepts of mechanics of solids. Look up what is shear flow and how does that lead to shear stress distribution in beams, even when the deformation, the shear deformations are zero. Now, this seemingly contradictory state of affairs, I mean, you have shear stress when shear strain is zero, is resolved by assuming the system to have infinite shear rigidity. So as you know, stress is equal to elastic modulus multiplied by strain. Stress is proportional to strain. So if the strain is zero but the shear modulus is infinite, then that together, that product of infinity multiplied by zero gives you some finite value, and that is what you consider as the shear stress. So that's a some way to find a justification for the result, trying to dress up the result, find an explanation for the results that we are getting, right? And we will return to this explanation, this particular, I would say, I don't like to call it as an explanation, I just like to call it as an excuse for having shear stresses with zero shear deformation when we discuss the problem of plate bending. This problem is much more acute when you discuss the modeling of bending of plates and shells. So we will return to this particular aspect, and please keep this in mind. This is, we reconcile the presence of shear stresses in the beams in the face of zero shear deformation by assuming the system to have infinite shear rigidity. Right? So it is because of infinite shear rigidities that the shear deformation is zero. Okay, so now we relax it a little bit. Now we relax this assumption of zero shear deformation. We admit shear deformations to take place. So what is the most significant thing that will happen?
So strain distribution will not be linear. Strain distribution.
Well, we are still in the linear domain. We are still dealing with linear elasticity problem. It's just that there are two modes of deformation. There is a flexural mode and there is a shear deformation. We are not saying that shear deformations are going to be zero. That's all. And it's not that we are getting into non-linear range or anything like that. It's just that we are saying that shear deformations need not be zero. So what will happen if shear deformations are not zero? So what changes?
So the mission plane section remains plane before and after bending will not hold.
Yes. So what will be the implication of that if this assumption does not hold?
Cross section element will not be perpendicular to neutral axis.
Yes. So far so good. So what are the implications of that? Implication is, so far we have been taking the slope of the deflected shape, deflection curve, to be same as the rotation of the sections. And it is the section rotation which is actually proportional to the moment curvature relation. So it is, we all actually look at the section rotations. Right? But if the shear deformations are zero, then section rotation is same as the slope of the deflected shape. Now if shear deformations are not zero, then these two quantities are not interchangeable. The cross-section, rotation of the cross-section plane and the slope of the deflected shape will be different. Right? So we can have a situation where we have displacement function v as a function of x, and once we have v as a function of x, we can also have slope dv by dx as a function of x. Now this, for the bending, we actually need, to find the curvature, we actually need the rate of change of rotation of the slope, rotation of the sections, how the sections are rotating over a distance. Right. So that is what the curvature is. So earlier this curvature was defined as due to second derivative of the displacement, because the section rotation was same as dv by dx. So another derivative, and you get the curvature. So now we need to find out what is the section rotation. So section rotation will be obtained by subtracting shear deformation. Whatever is the shear deformation in the cross section at that particular section, that needs to be removed from the slope of the deflected shape, slope of the deflection curve. So dv by dx includes not just section rotation, but it also includes the shear strain, distortion, shear distortion. Right. So what happens is, dv by dx is equal to theta plus gamma. Right. So theta is section rotation due to flexure, and gamma shear distortion. Right, so theta can be given as dv by dx minus gamma. Right? Moment, bending moment at a section is proportional to EI times d theta by dx. Right? So this will be equal to EI times d over dx. And what will be the shear force? Shear force will of course be proportional to the shear deformation then. Shear force will be equal to shear strain multiplied by area of cross section multiplied by the shear modulus, and then this is the shape parameter K that will depend on the cross section, shape of the cross section. So that is the shear force, right? So dV by dx is given by Q, that's the applied load in the beam, so this will be equal to right. So actually it would be better if I write not in terms of this but gamma is equal to this minus theta. So gamma and of course from equilibrium we have dm by dx is equal to v, so we can write here pi d theta by dx a times ga times gamma, gamma is dv by dx minus theta. So the idea is we have two equations now because of this. First equation d theta by dx minus a times ga dv by dx minus theta is equal to 0, and the second equation is kga dv by dx dv by dx minus theta. Minus q is equal to 0. So these are the two coupled set of two coupled differential equations that describes the bending of beams including shear deformations. Oh, when did I lose this? Are you here?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so when did I lose this presentation screen? Were you following the present development what I was referring to? The shear deformation? Yeah? So you could follow this from V equal to, so V is of course proportional to the shear deformation. So shear modulus multiplied by area of cross section multiplied by shear strain, and this is the shape factor that depends on the shape of the cross section. And rate of change of shear force is of course equal to the applied load intensity. So that's how you get, and this is the equilibrium, vertical equilibrium. Horizontal equilibrium, rate of change of the moment is of course equal to proportional to the curvature, so that would be d theta by dx. So theta is the section rotation, curvature would be rate of change of section rotations. And considering moment and shear relationship, so dm by dx is equal to shear force, so you apply that, substitute relevant quantities, and you have this relationship. So eventually when you combine these two, so your equations now become, you have two equations in two variables, v and theta, right? So there are two equations in two variables, transverse displacement v and section rotation theta. So we can, obviously if dv by dx is equal to theta, then this entire thing actually reduces to the same equation that we have, Euler-Bernoulli beam hypothesis, right? And we will end up with the same equation as the fourth order differential equation. But in this case, if the shear deformations are non-zero, then we have the situation where dv by dx, this slope of the deflected shape is not same as the section rotation, and these two have to be treated differently. And when we do that, we accommodate shear deformations which are important in the case of deep beams, but we also surprisingly end up with a very simple model for beam deformation. You will realize that individually now both of these are the two equations that you see here, they are of second order differential equations. We now have split a fourth order differential equation into a set of two second order differential equations. And for second order differential equations, the weak form, the largest order, highest order derivative in the weak form is only going to be of 1, right? And once we have, since the highest derivative is 1 in the weak form, the finite element interpolation can be modeled as a C0 continuity element. And we will see how to do that. And it so happens, I mean, paradoxically, if we relax the assumption of shear deformation, we get a more general theory, and that more general theory actually leads to a much simpler finite element model. Right? So, too good to be true, and indeed that is so. It's too good to be true, but let's wait for the magic in our next class. Thank you. I will stop here.